be doing the hard questions.
Wow.
When the pandemic was officially announced, I felt nervous.
I felt scared and worried for everyone in our community.
When the pandemic was first announced, it was super scary for me.
When the pandemic was officially announced, I was scared.
So when the pandemic was first announced and we knew we had to go into quarantine, I think I was feeling pretty scared about everything that was happening and not knowing what the future was going to look like. So that was all pretty overwhelming.
I really thought it was going to be more temporary. That's what I was hoping, that's what I was expecting.
When the pandemic hit, I did not realize that it would be exactly what it ended up being, and I think the shock of it, like a few weeks later when you realized really fully encompassing what it was going to end up being, was a lot more surprising than when it first came about.
So I have all my life turned to books to make me feel better. So prior to becoming a librarian, I was in another career. I had another master's degree and I hated every second of it. And so I would leave on my lunch break and go to the library and read books from my childhood to make myself feel better about my day. And I still do that. And so typically the books I turn to in that situation are Judy Blume books. I grew up on them. I've loved them my whole life. And I did reread a couple of them while I was at home for Stay Home, Stay Safe. So I reread Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, and Deanie, both by Judy Blume.
I actually had a really hard time reading during the pandemic. I knew like some people were reading 30 books. I was reading one book maybe a month. But there is a book that I always read when I'm very sad, and people are going to be very shocked. That book is Mr. Darcy Takes a Wife, which is kind of like a fan fiction of Pride and Prejudice, of what happens after Pride and Prejudice. And it is so great for when you are feeling down because it is nothing to do with modern society. And you can just sort of take yourself out of it. There's, nothing bad. I mean, there is a war. There is a war. But apart from that, nothing bad happens. So I would recommend it.
Well, once we found out that we were going to be home for a long period of time, I started trying to focus on reading more for pleasure. I am a children's librarian, so I read a lot of children's books, which I love. But I wanted to focus more on what I wanted to read in the moment, which I haven't had a lot of time to do. So I guess I like to read books when I'm feeling, I like books that take me away. So that's typically adult fiction. I actually really enjoy horror books and thriller books, psychological thrillers. I like a little romance. So I definitely was reading more adult books, which I don't often have time to read, especially because I have children of my own, and kind of focusing on myself and taking that time for myself to maybe even just collect my thoughts and take myself away into a good book.
So during the pandemic, I'll be honest, I didn't turn to any books during the time because I was scared or I needed some comfort. The reason is I was working really hard here and still working full-time from home. And I have what I affectionately call pandemic brain, as so much of my brain power was going into changing things around here to offer new services to the public that I just didn't have brain power left at night to relax. What actually did relax me is the best game ever that came out the first week of the pandemic, Animal Crossing, for the Nintendo Switch. And that's been what I've been doing at night. This summer I've been starting to pick up books again, but I need something relatively brainless right now.
In thinking about the pandemic, the first book that comes to mind is Station 11, which is about maybe a year or two after there's a global pandemic, which wipes out quite a bit of the population. But there's a traveling Shakespeare group that travels around the west coast of Michigan. Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel was a Michigan notable book a few years ago. And I just read The Glass Hotel, also by her, which I really liked. But luckily, it's not that bad. When I was first home and, thinking it was going to be temporary, I really plowed through some more lighter reading, less literary. I ran through a couple mysteries. I had some romances at home. I read Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which is totally adorable, and I could read really fast and it would absolutely take your mind off things if you like romance books by Talia Hibbert. But, if I'm feeling down or if I'm feeling worried, anything that's a good story to take me out of where I am and put me into that other character's space is good.
So when the pandemic hit and I knew I was going to be home for a little while, this is always a good time for me to read books that I have at home that I might read more than once, which is for me very few books. But as luck would have it, a new installation, the prequel to The Hunger Games, was coming out, and this is one of those books that I will read over and over again. But it's been a few years since I've read the Hunger Games trilogy. So for me, that was my go-to. I read all three of those books, and then I was so excited to have a fresh book from that trilogy come out, the prequel, which is the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, that came out about mid-pandemic, and I had already pre-ordered it months before. So for me, that was something that was easy to hold on to, and also to go to a dystopian world that was much worse than our pandemic was also a nice visit as well, as weird as that sounds.
So with all the stress of quarantine, I always turn to books for comfort, but I needed to read things that were completely not about the current world. I started reading a lot more romantic comedies because they're just extremely escapist, and everything is going to turn out well, and you don't have to think too much. So it really just gave comfort to escape into a nice, happy story about two people falling in love and their misadventures in a world that is perfectly safe.
Thank you for watching our pandemic reading list. If there are any books that you want to know more about, any other recommendations you're looking for, or you want to let us know what you've been reading while you've been at home, what's helping you cope, let us know in the comments.